The snow in Chicago doesn't fall clean. It comes down gray, like the city is already tired of pretending. Laurel Voss was 22 years old, worked the overnight shift at a diner on West Belmont, and had learned very quickly that Chicago at 2 a.m. had its own set of rules. You didn't make eye contact with the man in the corner booth nursing black coffee for 3 hours. You didn't ask questions when a customer paid in cash and left before the food arrived. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, walked home through the alley behind the freight depot. She walked through it anyway, because her bus pass had run out 2 days ago and the next paycheck was still 4 days away, and the alley saved her 11 minutes. That's when she found the girl. She almost missed her. The child was tucked against a dumpster, knees pulled to her chest, wearing a school uniform that had no business being outside in February. 8 years old, maybe 9. Dark hair plastered to her forehead. Her lips were the color of old ash. Hey, sweetheart. Laurel dropped to her knees in the wet snow without thinking about her work pants or the cold or anything else. Can you hear me? The girl's eyes opened halfway. My tummy hurts, she whispered. I want my daddy. Laurel looked around the alley. Nobody, nothing but wind and the distant sound of a train. She pressed her fingers to the child's wrist and felt a pulse, thin and unsteady. The girl's skin was ice. Whatever had happened, whether she'd wandered off or been left or something worse, she wasn't going to last another 20 minutes out here. Laurel pulled off her own jacket and wrapped it around the child. Then she reached into the pocket of the girl's uniform blazer, looking for a phone, a school ID, anything. She found a cell phone, cracked screen, but the battery still read 41%. There were no recent texts, no missed calls, just a contact list, and at the very top, pinned, a name that read Daddy with a small red heart next to it. Laurel pressed call before she thought about what she was doing. It rang twice. Who is this? The voice on the other end was quiet, not sleepy quiet. Quiet the way a room gets quiet right before something breaks. I found a little girl, Laurel said. She's in the alley behind the Halstead Freight Depot. She's conscious but barely. She's really cold and I think she might be sick, not just from the weather. She asked for her daddy. Is this? Don't move. A pause, half a breath. Don't touch her phone again. Don't call anyone else. Are you listening to me? I'm listening, Laurel said, because something in his voice told her that arguing would cost time she didn't have. What's she wearing? School uniform. Dark plaid. There's a crest on the blazer. I can't read it in the dark. Another pause, and she heard something shift on his end. Movement. The muffled sound of other voices being cut short by a single word she didn't catch. Is she breathing normally? She's breathing. She said her stomach hurts. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. She counted. I'm 12 minutes away. Don't leave her. The line went dead. If you're new to Sadie's Romance Library, welcome, and you are not ready for what's about to happen. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay until the end, because this story goes places I promise you won't see coming. He arrived in 9 minutes. 3 black SUVs, no plates, pulling into the alley with their headlights cutting the dark like they owned it. Which, Laurel would later understand, was not entirely an exaggeration. The man who got out of the center vehicle was tall, not in a way that seemed accidental. Everything about him had the look of something deliberate. The dark coat, the jaw set like he'd decided years ago that showing worry was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was somewhere in his early 40s, maybe. Black hair with the first gray at the temples. Eyes that moved across the alley the way a scan moves across a room, touching every corner before landing on what they actually came for. They landed on his daughter. For 1 second, just one, something cracked open in his expression. Then it closed again, so fast Laurel almost thought she'd imagined it. He dropped to one knee in the snow beside the girl, completely indifferent to his coat or his slacks or anything else. Marisol. His voice, for the first time, had an edge to it that had nothing to do with authority. Marisol, I'm here. The girl stirred. Daddy, she murmured, and grabbed for his hand with both of hers. He held on. He looked up at Laurel over his daughter's head. She said her stomach hurts, Laurel said before he could speak. She might have eaten something. Her pulse was weak when I found her. She's been out here a while. The snow under her was all wretchedly compacted when I arrived, which means she was sitting for at least. How do you know that? I grew up in Minnesota. She shrugged. We learned snow. He studied her for a moment. You called immediately? The second I found her. He looked at the jacket still wrapped around his daughter's shoulders, Laurel's jacket. Then he looked back at her, at the thin diner uniform shirt she was standing in February in an alley. He said nothing. He turned to one of the men behind him. Get the car warm. Tell Reyes to meet us at the house, not the clinic. Then he lifted his daughter, blanket and all, like she weighed nothing. He walked toward the SUV. Laurel started to reach for her jacket. Leave it. He didn't turn around. One of my men will replace it. It's my only. I know. He opened the car door himself, settled Marisol onto the seat, and finally turned back. Get in. Laurel blinked. I'm sorry. You're coming with us. He said it the same way people say it's raining, like it was simply a fact about the world that had already been decided. You found her, you stayed, you noticed the snow. I have questions. You could ask them here. I could. He held her gaze for a moment. But I'm not going to. She got in the car. She would think about that later. About how she got into a blacked-out SUV with no license plates at 2 a.m, with a man whose name she still didn't know, and felt, somehow, less afraid than she'd been in the alley alone. The house was not a house. It was a building in Lincoln Park that looked like an ordinary stone townhouse from the outside and revealed itself to be something else entirely once you were past the door. Security panels behind antique millwork, corridors that turned at precise angles, rooms that were furnished beautifully and felt, underneath the beauty, like they were designed to contain. Every elegant thing in them also happened to double as cover. Laurel sat in a kitchen that cost more than 3 years of her rent and watched a man named Reyes, who introduced himself only as the family's physician, examine Marisol with quiet efficiency. The little girl had color coming back into her cheeks now, tucked under a blanket on the kitchen's long bench seat, sipping something warm that Reyes had prepared. The man, she still didn't know his name, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Reyes, watching his daughter, watching Laurel. She was at school, he said, finally, to no one in particular. She was at school at 3 p.m. I received a message at midnight that she was staying late for a drama rehearsal. You didn't go get her? He turned. The look he gave her was not unkind, exactly, but it was the look of someone who had been asked a question that revealed more about the asker's assumptions than they intended. I sent a driver. The driver reported that she left the school with the faculty chaperone at 8 o'clock. He paused. The faculty chaperone says she never came back inside after the break at 6. Laurel looked at Marisol. At the dark circles under her eyes, the careful way she held her stomach. 2 hours outside in February. Yes. And whoever sent you the midnight text was not, I now understand, from the school. The kitchen went quiet enough that the refrigerator hum seemed loud. I'm Laurel, she said. Laurel Voss. He looked at her for a moment. Then Declan. He offered nothing else. No last name, no title, no context. Just the one word, landing with the quiet confidence of a man who rarely needed to explain who he was. Declan, she repeated. Your daughter is 9? 8. She'll be 9 in March, betch. Smart kid. She kept herself awake. She knew to stay still instead of walking around and burning through her warmth. Laurel paused. She's a good kid. Something moved through his expression that he didn't manage to close off fast enough. Yes, he said. She is. Reyes looked up from across the kitchen. She's going to be fine. Mild hypothermia, early stage. Whatever she ingested, my best guess is the stomach pain is stress-related, not chemical. I'll run a blood panel to confirm, but her responses are good. He looked at Declan. She needs sleep and warmth and someone she trusts sitting nearby. I'll sit with her, Declan said immediately. Reyes nodded. Then he looked at Laurel with the professional, assessing look of a man whose job required him to notice things quickly. You're cold. I'm fine. You've been outside in February without a coat for. He glanced at Declan. Over an hour, Declan said. Sit down, Reyes said to Laurel. It was not a request. It was the same caliber of certainty she'd already heard twice tonight, from a different man in this building, and she found herself sitting down before she'd decided to. She was still in the kitchen at 4 a.m. when Declan came back downstairs. He sat across from her at the kitchen island, without asking if she wanted company. Set down 2 cups of coffee, pushed one toward her. She wrapped her hands around it and said nothing. You work at the diner on Belmont, he said. You had someone look me up. Yes. She should have been unsettled by this. She noted that she wasn't, quite, and filed that away as something to think about when she wasn't running on 2 hours of sleep and adrenaline. Why? Because you were in my daughter's space at 2 in the morning, and I needed to know who you are. He said it flatly, without apology. You've worked there for 14 months. Before that, a coffee shop in Wicker Park. Before that, you were in school, community college, medical sciences track. You dropped out. He paused. Why? Money ran out. Just money? She looked at him over her coffee cup. My mother got sick. I was the only one around to help. She paused. She passed away 8 months ago. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, you didn't do it. She said it without bitterness. It was just true. He almost smiled. Something at the corner of his mouth moved and then was disciplined back into stillness. The medical sciences background. Is that why you knew what to check for when you found her? I checked her pulse and noticed she was hypothermic. You don't need medical school for that. You noticed the snow compaction. That's just common sense. It's not, he said simply. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people also wouldn't have called immediately and stayed on the line and given me usable information while standing in a freezing alley in a shirt. He looked at her. Most people would have called 911 and left. She asked for her daddy, Laurel said. I wasn't going anywhere. He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she became aware of the sound of the clock on the kitchen wall, the distant hum of the city outside. You can stay until morning, he said finally. I'll have someone drive you wherever you need to go. You don't have to, Laurel. Her name in his mouth was quiet and entirely certain. You gave my daughter your coat. You can stay until morning. She stayed until morning. Now, before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing all your cities and countries show up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We post new stories every week and you do not want to miss where this one goes. She expected that to be the end of it. She expected to be driven home in one of those black SUVs, handed an envelope with some cash in it that she wouldn't know whether to take or refuse, and returned to her ordinary life with a story she couldn't tell anyone. That's not what happened. 3 days later, she came out of the diner after her shift to find a man she didn't recognize leaning against a car parked directly in front of the entrance. He was young, mid-20s, with a kind of alert stillness that she was starting to recognize as a professional habit. Miss Voss? She stopped. Mr. Shea would like to speak with you, Mr. Shea. So that was the last name. She should have said no. She had a bus to catch and leftover soup to heat up, and a library book that was 3 days overdue and had nothing to do with men named Shea, who arrived in fleets of unmarked vehicles at 2 in the morning. She got in the car. Declan Shea, she learned over the following week, was not a man who explained himself more than once. He ran, and she had to piece this together from context and careful listening, and a few overheard conversations she was pretty sure she wasn't supposed to hear. Something that wasn't illegal, exactly, but that existed in the space adjacent to legality that required having a lot of people on your side who were very good at very specific things. He had a reputation in certain parts of Chicago that she gathered was the reason why his name was always said a half-step quieter than the names of the people saying it. He'd had a wife. She'd died when Marisol was 3. He didn't talk about her, but the evidence was everywhere in the house. Photographs turned to face walls. A room on the 2nd floor that was always locked. The way Marisol sometimes said Mama would have liked this about very ordinary things like the color of the sunset or the smell of rain. What Declan wanted, it turned out, was simple and also not simple at all. Marisol's tutor left last month, he told her, in the same kitchen, at the same island, over the same category of late-night coffee. I need someone to fill the gap until the school term resumes. Someone who can also accompany her to appointments, activities. Be present. Laurel looked at him. You want me to be her nanny. I want you to be someone she trusts. He paused. She's been asking about you. Since when? Since the morning you left. Something moved behind his eyes. She wants to know if you're the lady who gave her your jacket. Laurel was quiet for a moment. This isn't what I do, she said finally. I know. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking you to do it anyway. Why me specifically? He was quiet for a moment. In the way she was starting to understand meant he was choosing his words with more care than usual. Because you found her in an alley and your first instinct was to take off your coat. He paused. I've met a lot of people in my life who would have walked past, and I've met people who would have stayed, but for reasons, because they recognized her, or because they wanted something in return. Another pause. You stayed because she said she wanted her daddy. Laurel didn't have an argument for that. She gave the diner 3 days' notice and moved into the third-floor guest room of Declan Shea's Lincoln Park townhouse on a Tuesday. She told herself it was temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month. Marisol would start school again, and Declan would find someone more qualified, and Laurel would take her savings, which, in 6 weeks, were already more than she'd saved in the previous 2 years, and go back to school. Finish the medical program, do what she'd been working toward before everything fell apart. That was the plan. The problem with the plan was Marisol. Marisol Shea was 8 years old and had the particular kind of seriousness that children develop when they've lost something enormous and have had to rebuild their understanding of the world without it. She wasn't sad in an obvious way. She laughed easily, at genuinely funny things, not politely, the way some kids laugh when they think they're supposed to. She was specific about what she liked and honest about what she didn't. She'd told Laurel within the first 48 hours that she didn't like the word sweetie, that she was allergic to strawberries but not other fruits, and that she wanted to be a forensic scientist when she grew up, not a princess. And anyone who said otherwise was clearly not paying attention. Laurel had told her she'd make an excellent forensic scientist. Marisol had looked at her with that careful, measuring look and said, "My dad says you almost went to school to be a nurse. Medical sciences. A little different. Why didn't you?" Life got complicated. Marisol had thought about this for a moment, with the focused intensity of a child doing actual analysis. "My dad says that when life gets complicated, you have to figure out which part of the complication you can fix and fix that first." Laurel had looked at her. "That's pretty good advice." "He gives good advice," Marisol said, with the matter-of-fact loyalty of someone who has decided on a fact and sees no reason to negotiate it. "He's not very good at saying nice things out loud, but his advice is really good." 4 weeks in, something changed. It started small. A man outside the school, Marisol's school had resumed, and Laurel was in the habit of picking her up, who seemed to be watching the exit more than most parents watched the exit. Laurel noticed him, because he was wearing a coat that was too light for the temperature, and he'd been standing in the same spot for 20 minutes without looking at a phone or speaking to anyone. She moved Marisol out of the main stream of parents and children, through a side corridor, and out through the gymnasium exit instead. When she told Declan that evening, he went very still. What did he look like? She described him. Declan's jaw tightened by a fraction. He looked at the man standing near the kitchen door, Boyd, who was Laurel's least favorite of the rotating crew of security personnel, mostly because he'd initially made it clear that he considered her a liability and not an asset. "Pull the school footage," Declan said. Boyd left the room. "Is Marisol in danger?" Laurel asked. He looked at her, the kind of look that considered how much to say. "There are people who have reasons to want leverage over me. My daughter is the most obvious kind of leverage." He paused. "What you saw today may be nothing, or it may be the beginning of something." "Who?" "A man named Percival Grun." The name came out the way Declan said very few things, with the contained, controlled precision of someone who had trained themselves not to show contempt. "He and I have a history involving a business arrangement that ended badly." "For him? How badly?" "Badly enough that he holds grudges." Laurel sat with that, and the fact that Marisol was in the alley may not have been an accident. He said it quietly. "I've been considering that possibility since the night you called." She thought about that February alley, the compacted snow, the school uniform, the text message from a number that wasn't from the school. "Someone lured her there," Laurel said, attempted to. He met her eyes, and then didn't follow through. "Which is the part I don't understand. Maybe they didn't expect someone to find her that fast. The freight depot alley isn't a shortcut that most people know about." He looked at her steadily. "How did you know about it?" "I've been walking home that way for 4 months. She paused. "Saves 11 minutes. He said nothing for a moment. 11 minutes. The bus pass is expensive. For just a moment, the second time she'd seen it, something cracked in his expression. Not pity, something less comfortable than pity and more personal. I'll add a transit stipend to your arrangement, he said. That's not why I mentioned it. I know. He looked at her. That's why I'm adding it. The next 10 days were quiet in the way that felt like waiting. Laurel found herself paying attention to things she'd never had reason to pay attention to before. Parked cars that stayed parked too long, faces that appeared twice in different contexts, the particular way Declan's security team communicated with their eyes when they thought she wasn't watching. She started walking Marisol in irregular patterns. Different routes, different timing, never quite the same as the day before. Declan noticed. You changed the pickup rotation, he said one evening. Patterns are predictable, she said. Predictable is a liability. She paused. You said that last Tuesday. I was listening. He looked at her. I didn't say it to you. You said it to Boyd. I was in the hallway. Another one of those silences that had become, she realized, a kind of communication of their own. You listen to things that aren't directed at you. Old habit. The diner teaches you that. He almost smiled again. I've been thinking about your dropout, he said. The medical program. What about it? The school you attended. They have a part-time evening program for students who had to leave for extenuating circumstances. Petition-based readmission. He paused. I spoke to the department head. She stared at him. You. She stopped. You called my school. I made an inquiry. On my behalf. On the basis of curiosity, he held her gaze without apology. The department head says your academic record was strong. The petition is straightforward. The only barrier would be scheduling and funding, which are significant barriers. They're solvable, he said, with the particular certainty of a man to whom most barriers were in fact solvable, given sufficient resources. If you want to solve them. She was quiet for a long moment. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for an equally long moment. Because you gave my daughter your coat in an alley, and then you gave her 3 months of your time, and you have a talent for paying attention. He looked at her, direct and steady. That talent shouldn't stay in a diner on Belmont. She looked away first, at the window, at the Chicago skyline doing what it always did, glittering without apology against the dark. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I asked. The problem with Percival Grun turned out not to be what Declan expected. The man outside the school appeared twice more. Laurel spotted him both times before the security team did. The second time, she got close enough, walking Marisol out through a crowd of parents, casual and deliberate, to read 3 digits of the plate on a car she was now certain was his. She gave them to Boyd. Boyd, for the first time in 3 months, looked at her with something other than professional skepticism. Where'd you get these? I walked past the car on the way in. She shrugged. I happened to notice plates. Who taught you that? Nobody. I just remember numbers. He passed them to Declan, and Declan ran them through channels. Laurel didn't ask about and came back with a name that was not Percival Grun. It was the name of a doctor. His name was Benedict Armon. He'd treated Marisol once, 3 years ago, for a routine procedure at a private clinic on the north side. He'd also, Declan's people discovered, been receiving payments from a holding company connected, through 3 layers of paper, to Grun's interests. But that wasn't the thing that mattered most. The thing that mattered most was what Laurel found in Marisol's backpack on a Thursday evening while helping her organize for the next day's classes. A small folded note, tucked inside a library book, written in handwriting that didn't belong to any 8-year-old. She didn't open her mouth. She set the backpack down calmly, told Marisol she was going to get a snack, and walked with measured steps to the kitchen, where Declan was standing over the island with a cup of coffee and a phone he wasn't looking at. She put the note on the counter. He read it. She watched his face do the same thing she'd watched it do in the alley, that 1 second of crack before everything sealed back over. This time it lasted half a second longer. When? He said. Today. It was inside the library book she checked out at school. She didn't see it? She didn't open that one yet. Laurel looked at him steadily. They have access to her. They've had access to her. He put his hands flat on the counter. It was the most physical expression of emotion she'd ever seen from him, and it said more than the 3 sentences that followed it. I know. This ends tonight, he said. How? I'm going to have a conversation with Dr. Benedict Armon. He looked up. And then with Percival Grun. Those are separate conversations. Initially, something moved in his expression. You and Marisol are going to my sister's in Evanston tonight, Boyd will take you. And if I'd rather stay? He looked at her. It was not the look of a man who was dismissing her. It was the look of a man who was acutely aware of what she was offering, and was choosing, carefully, not to take it. Laurel, I need to know she's somewhere safe. He held her gaze. That means I need you to be there too. She held his gaze back. A long moment, the kitchen clock marking the silence. Okay, she said, but I want to know what happens. You'll know. He said it with the same certainty he'd said everything. I'll tell you myself. She told herself, in the car to Evanston, that she was calm because she was practical, because she'd grown up in Minnesota where winters taught you not to panic, and practicality was the only language the cold understood. She told herself this and didn't entirely believe it. Marisol fell asleep 20 minutes into the drive with her head against Laurel's arm, her small hand curled loosely around Laurel's sleeve in a grip that hadn't loosened even in sleep. Laurel looked out the window at the highway lights sliding past. She thought about a diner on Belmont, and a bus pass, and an alley that saved 11 minutes. She thought about the way Declan had looked at her from across the kitchen, the very first night, and said, I have questions like. It was a perfectly reasonable thing to say to a stranger who just found your daughter in the snow. She thought about how, somewhere in the last 3 months, she had stopped being a stranger. He called at 4 in the morning. She was awake. It's done. Grun is no longer in a position to create problems. A pause. Armand cooperated. The access point was the school's library system. He'd placed the note through a contact on the facilities staff. That contact is also no longer employed. Another pause. Marisol was never in direct danger tonight. I want you to know that. I know. She paused. How do you know she wasn't? Because I made sure of it. He said it quietly. 3 weeks ago. I had a contingency in place. I was waiting to see where it moved. Laurel absorbed this. You knew it was coming and you let it run. I needed to know the full shape of it before I closed it. You could have told me. Yes, he said. And then, after a moment, I'm sorry I didn't. She sat with that. Declan Shea apologizing was not. She was coming to understand a common event. It arrived the same way everything else about him arrived, directly, without decoration, without asking for anything in return. She's asleep, Laurel said. Good. She could hear something in his voice that she wasn't sure he was aware of, the very particular release of tension from someone who had been holding it for longer than they let show. I'll come in the morning. Okay. A pause. Laurel. Yeah, thank you. He was quiet for a moment. For all of it. She looked out the window at the dark suburb, at the trees that were finally starting to show the pale suggestions of March buds. You already thanked me with the transit stipend, she said. He almost laughed. She could hear it, even through the phone, even restrained the way he restrained everything. The half sound of something that wanted to be laughter and decided at the last second to let itself. Get some sleep, he said. You too. The line went quiet. She kept the phone in her hand for a little while, sitting in the dark in his sister's guest room, Marisol sleeping soundly in the next room over. The snow had started again outside. She could see it in the window, coming down the way Chicago snow always did, gray and tired and relentless. Not clean, but there anyway. She put the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. March, she thought. Marisol's birthday in March. She fell asleep thinking about what you got an 8-year-old girl who wanted to be a forensic scientist and would be 9 in 3 weeks, and had survived one long February by staying still and remembering what mattered. Something worth finding, she decided. Something worth the looking. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where does this go? What happens when Declan comes to Evanston in the morning? And what does a man like that do when he realizes the most useful, most present, most quietly necessary person in his daughter's life is someone he almost drove past in a freight depot alley? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you think should happen next. And if you've been listening since before the halfway point, drop the word Chicago below so I know who my real ones are. Don't forget to like this video. It helps more people find this story. And subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library because we are just getting started and Laurel Voss deserves an ending worth staying up for.